thank you all for joining. I see a number of you on Zoom already, and those numbers going up. So thank you all for being here live. Is it being recorded? Of course it's being recorded. We have to record all this stuff, right? We need this to watch later. Even at other cons, you watch it talk, and sometimes you gotta watch it multiple times for it to really sink in, or maybe you missed something. So it's all gonna be recorded, and we'll be posting that up probably early next week. And again, we are on Discord. So head over there. Of course, you can ask questions right through Zoom. I'm going to have that up here, but really for the interaction purposes. And if you've gone to any of these other conferences, right, the DEF CON, Red Team Village, Blue Team Village, Career Hacking Village, Black Hills, Trusted Sec, Wild West Hack Fest, DerpCon, GrimCon, we've all been using Discord. So hopefully you're all on there. The link is on here. I also posted it out, and I'll give a quick walkthrough on that. With me today, I have the unicorn himself, Bryson. How are you today?
Every day is a holiday, George.
Awesome. And most of you know Bryson because he started the whole unicorn thing, right? And that has developed from a onesie to a full suit now, and now we have a dark mode.
Yep, this is unicorn dark mode. So the unicorn onesie grew out of I think it was going to a DerbyCon conference several years ago, and I had an inflatable unicorn costume that I wore and was up on stage with the rock band. And then after that, I decided I needed something a little bit easier to get around with. So I got the unicorn onesie, wore that for a couple of years. Turns out that those are really hot. I got tired of being warm everywhere. So then I started branching into different unicorn looks with hoodies. So there's now different unicorns that come to it. But the thing about the unicorn is that, first of all, anybody can be one, and it takes a herd. If John Strand were on, he would first correct that the official name for a herd of unicorns is a blessing. Now, I feel silly saying that, so we're just going to go with join the herd. And that's really the philosophy behind what we're doing here today. Is UniCon is essentially our first technical user conference. We've been working on this platform in different versions for over 4 years. And the design philosophy behind it was always that this was something that you could adjust and develop to you. And most of that development has come from our SCYTHE engineering team. And we have an Ask Me Anything to different engineers later in the conference to talk to them, because these folks have been building implants for a long time. And so what I think is so cool about what we're doing here with the marketplace is that this is unlocking the innovation of the community. It's no longer just tied to a small group of engineers doing something. It's now open to anybody that wants to contribute. So I like to think about it as the next evolution of what bug bounties have been. There, it's democratizing the ability to find vulnerabilities. Here, we're democratizing the ability to understand what's the risk after a vulnerability, and the ability to create a module that might be just, hey, this is my favorite thing to do every time I get on target as a red team operator. Or this is something that I saw when we did a purple team exercise, and wouldn't it be great to not have to hand jam this 500 times? Or, hey, here's a new way to get credentials. And this is now in a safe and closed environment. So this isn't like we're just unleashing things into the world. We're helping foster that ecosystem where that innovation can be harnessed safely and done in professional environments. So this is just really exciting to see all that happen. And for all of you that are watching and watch this in the future, please reach out to us and tell us how we can make this better, because we are not trying to make money off of this. We are not trying to do anything other than figure out how do we help create an ecosystem that builds on itself. And since we're kind of having that more of that hands-off approach, we don't really know how it's going to go. I've had this question a lot, like, well, what about this and what about that? I'm like, I have no idea. We really are depending on you in the community, and your participation is going to be what drives the value and how vibrant this ends up being.
Yeah, and we're super excited to launch that today. We'll go through some quick intro stuff, the agenda and whatnot. So the first thing is Discord. I posted the Discord link. Yes, it is the Grim Discord, and we really want to thank Grim for providing that. So if you've attended GrimCon 1 or GrimCon 0x2, then you're already on there. And if you can see my screen here, obviously everyone has a cajillion Discord servers now. I try to clean it up so that I don't have to scroll them, but we are in the Grim one. That is Grim on top of a unicorn. And we have the general topics here. Of course, you can interact there, but there's a section for us right here called UniCon. And there's 4 channels. There's LobbyCon. That's where you can chat with everyone. Of course, you know, like every other conference, just be regular humans, right? Don't troll, don't insult, don't harass, etc. We do have moderators there, but we trust that this won't be a problem. And then we have the briefings. Briefings is where we'll be able to interact and ask the speakers questions. I'll show you the agenda shortly. One of the cool things you can do in here is you can do @ and the speaker. So if I want to ask Olaf a question, I can just go @ Olaf. Here is my question. And if I send that over, he will see an alert. We also have the CTF, which we will present at 11 in the morning. So it's not open yet, don't worry. We'll open it up at 11, as well as module dev. So whether you want to create a new module, be part of the marketplace, all of that we will introduce also at 11. And it's all here for you to interact. One of the things that we miss a lot from the actual conferences is being able to talk with each other. So Discord allows that, and we welcome you onto the Discord and hope to see you there. We will take questions both through Zoom and through Discord, but Olaf, after his talk, and all the speakers after their talk will be available on the Discord. So it'll be better, and you get to interact with some of these awesome people. So make your way over to Discord. We have moderators and folks there to answer any questions. Just let us know. We're also on Twitter. We're using #UniCon, so feel free to take screenshots and post and tag us and interact. We all love us some Twitter. So what is today going to look like? It is a full-day conference, and we're doing some things a little different. And yes, it's all free. Someone was asking, how much does it cost to pay CTF? It's free. How much is the live DJ that will be playing during lunch? It's free. How about module development? Free. What about choose your own adventure? All free, all here for the community. As Bryson mentioned, this is not our method of making money. This is really to give back to the community and for all of us to learn and support each other because we all make up this community. So our agenda, you can also see the agenda on scythe.io/unicon 2020. You can see on this slide here, we are starting here at the welcome. This is us welcoming you. Thank you all for being here. And in a few minutes, I will introduce our keynote speaker, who is Olaf Hartong. Then after Olaf speaks, he will be on the Discord answering any questions. We might do some question live based on the time. And Olaf, feel free to go a little bit over. We have plenty of time. Then around 11, we're going to launch the marketplace. We're going to show you what it is. And just as a hint, it's kind of like an app store, but for adversary behaviors and TTPs. It's really cool. It's really the back-end infrastructure that we've been building up so that you can share and even sell these behaviors. And to do that, you need to create modules. Those modules can be created in native code or in Python, because our SDK also supports Python, which we know you all love. So Adam is going to be showing you that. The SDK, of course, is also free. So we will show you that. Then, alongside SANS, C2 Matrix, Counter Hack, and NetWars, we have created a brand new CTF. No one has seen the CTF except the few people that helped me load test it because it's something completely different. One of the things that we do when we do red team engagements or purple team engagements is we create payloads. And as a red team, before we deploy those payloads, we should know what they do, right? So my idea for the CTF was, let's generate a number of different payloads and you will have to execute them and figure out what they do. So if you're in digital forensics and incident response, this might be an easy CTF for you. But if you're on the red team, this is stuff you should know. You should know the IOCs you're about to drop in a target environment. So it's 3 levels, and here we're gonna have the chance to win a whole bunch of swag. So definitely stay tuned for that. We'll announce that at 11:30, around 11:30 in the morning. We also have a choose your own adventure. And many of you might remember these books, right? The Choose Your Own Adventure books, lots of fun. Pretty much you read a scenario and you get to choose what you do next. And based on your choices, you might end up in a favorable situation or you might not. So we've created a couple of these. They ran at DEF CON and they're always changing. So that will be led by Bryson during our lunch break. And during our lunch break, we have something new. We're going to have a live DJ playing for you. So if you decide to play the CTF, because a lot of conferences have CTFs, but that means you miss talks, you can play the CTF while listening to music. Or if you want to do module development, we'll have engineers available for you during that time to answer any questions, along with some good music for you to listen. Or if neither of those interest you, you can do Choose Your Own Adventure with Bryson during that time. And if none of that interests you, you can just have lunch and listen to good music. So that is our net new here. Then in the afternoon, we have a keynote by John Strand. I'm sure you all know John Strand. His talk is titled Burn It All, the New Security Fundamentals. And John is a pretty good speaker. Many of you know him from SANS. Others know him from Black Hills Information Security or Active Countermeasures. So we're very happy to have him here. After that, we have lightning talks. These are quick talks, 20-minute talks. We have Marcello Salvanti talking about offensive Python. You probably know him based on all the tools he's released, right? CrackMap, exec, Silent Trinity, a bunch of tools, right? A lot of Python-based tools, so very happy to have him. Tillery will be presenting on VMware awareness. Once you arrive on a target system, you kind of want to know where you are, figure out if you're on a VM or not, because maybe someone's trying to analyze what your payloads do. Tillery will be doing that talk. And then Tim Medine, who is actually teaching this week, and we coordinated very well with him that during his break, he's going to come over here and give us a talk on Kerberoasting and how he created a module for SCYTHE that does Kerberoasting. After that, we allowed a little bit of break just to catch up in the event that anyone goes over those 20 minutes. And then we have 3 awesome talks. We have Matt DeVos speaking on the evolution and history of red team and offensive security. We have Chloe talking about hacker rights. And then we have an AMA of C2 implant creation. So Attik from our engineering team, he leads our engineering team, is going to talk about creating enterprise implants. Because when you are executing things on a system, especially in enterprise, the last thing you want to do is bring that system down or degrade it in any way. You want to do all your actions, but you also don't want to get caught. So that will be an AMA for everyone. And of course, we will wrap it up with a number of breakout rooms where we will do various different Zooms based on the different topics you want. So definitely check that out. We're on Discord, and that's our agenda. Next up, we have Olaf. And many of you know Olaf because of the work that he's done. Maybe you've seen a talk at Black Hat or DEF CON. He just did one on Purple Sharp with Mauricio. Maybe you saw him at MITRE ATT&CK, or maybe you're a Splunk user and you've used the ThreatHunting app he created there. Or maybe you're a Sysmon user and you've used Sysmon module. Now, most of us know him because of that. But what's something that many of you might not know about Olaf is that Disney created a movie and made one of the main characters after him. They actually called him up and said, can we use you as a character, as one of the coolest characters of any Disney film? And of course, I'm talking about Frozen. And this is Olaf. This is the movie Olaf. We have the real Olaf here. And the real Olaf is going to present to you now. And I would like you all to welcome him on Discord. And Olaf, we'll turn it over to you. We'll make you presenter. And thank you so much for being here. We're super excited.
Oh, and so am I, Jorge, and thanks for having me in the first place, especially the honor of keynoting. I mean, this is great. I've been looking forward to this one as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot share yet, but that will be happening soon, I figure. Oh, there we go. Should be able to do that now. Let me treat you to this. So I assume you can see my slide deck right now.
Yes, we can.
Yes, awesome. All right. Well, thanks for the great introduction. You saved me actually a little bit on my Who Am I slide. So I figured the talk should be something with unicorns, right? So we're chasing a magic unicorn. I'm a defender, so I'm kind of taking the defensive viewpoint in also having some challenges for you and some of my clients. Oops. So a small agenda here. We start off with some defensive challenges, either from the blue team or maybe their bosses. Then I want to introduce the concept of modern purple teaming, what it is, why you should be using it. There's some tooling involved, of course, and hopefully there's still some time for demos, if I don't talk too much. So who am I? Well, Jorge gave the great intro already. I love warm hugs, of course. I'm a father of 2 boys. I'm in InfoSec for quite some time. I've had various positions, but my true passion is with detection engineering and fiddling with data. So threat hunting, IR. I get particularly excited when there's a compromise or a breach. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I really like chasing those guys. And I think this started out early on in my career when I was there wasn't any security team back then, but I was a sysadmin at a broadcasting company, and we got the I love you worm and all kinds of other fun other worms after that, and spent hours in the data center trying to get Exchange back up and running. Some people might now be able to age me, which is fine. And then, of course, the important disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are personal, but also represent the ones of my company, since I am one of the co-founders of Falcon Force, and everybody agreed that it was safe to let me on this greatly organized conference. So let's kick it off a little bit. So let's say you work at a company, or you're one of my clients that has built a SOC. You spend a lot of money and effort in constructing a solid defense program, where you started onboarding all kinds of logs, you transformed everything. Everything is going into a nice SIM. You've been building all this detection logic on top of this, and basically you think you're doing great, right? You maybe augmented that with a couple of those great RSA buzzword tools with AI, ML. There's some CTI. You probably have some EDRs in there. Hopefully you do have some MFA, especially with the working from home situation. You harden the environment, and now your team is following up alerts. They're great, right? They think it's done, everything is implemented, and you're safe. But of course, that's not always the case. And some of the dilemmas that someone on that team might have is hey, I'm tackling all these alerts, I'm trying to resolve them, I'm doing my analysis. But we also get quite a bunch of false positives, but I'm too busy with getting rid of them instead of improving my detections, or maybe even hopefully creating some new ones. So trying to get that balance is often already quite difficult. And then if you do have the time to focus on these new detections or improving the ones, which one do you focus first, or how do I choose where to expand my scope? And then if you created some, how do you know that they're actually good, they're doing well? are you not missing anything? Are they still working even? So they haven't triggered for a while, but is that because it's broken, the data's not there, or maybe it's just that things are not happening? And then one of the other pitfalls that might occur is where you start building a lot of detections that are very signature based instead of behavior based. So you start focusing on all the IOCs that you get from all the emails and threat reports that you might get, and you immediately ingest that into a new rule instead of looking at how does this tool work, what happens, what kind of data is generated, and how do I actually make sure that I build a rigid detection capability. And my apologies for the very graphic sites, but I just found them funny. And then from the other end, so your boss, if you're in the detection team, it might be the CISO, might be an intermediary level, but they often have different kinds of challenges where they have the board or their boss asking a little bit about, okay, you're spending so much money, but can you explain why? And I mean, security is a cost, right? So why should we invest any more? And then as yourself, you might be thinking, are we doing enough? Or the board might be asking you, are we safe now? Are we spending enough money? Should we invest more? Is it too much? Which usually it isn't. But and then also, how do I know as a manager if my team is in control? Are they actually doing proper analysis? Are they not swamped with all kinds of side jobs? How do I know they're actually doing well? And then there might also be a regulator involved if you're in certain branches that actually also requires you to prove that your controls, whether they're detective, preventative, or mitigative, or whatever, they are actually functioning. And usually you can tell a little bit about the tickets that you're generating, how you're handling them, and you can tell a little bit about scope. But generally, it doesn't always feel like the complete picture. So we'll get back to that later. And then some of the pitfalls that a CISO also might have is they're not always matching the security strategy to the risk that the business actually has, or some of the business units. So this might also cause some of the questions that we had before, which might be explained with the wrong language from these people, because they often convey it from their own perspective, and they often forget to step into or to walk in somebody else's shoes and look at it from their perspective and what they are scared of. And then, of course, more tools and blinky boxes mostly doesn't solve the problem. In some cases, you might be lucky that it does, but generally, you're probably already having all the tools that you need. Just utilize them in a more efficient way would be already a big step up. And then lastly, one of my biggest beefs, which I've used a lot more times, but maybe somebody hasn't seen it before, but proper use of culturally embedded visuals is also one of the things where it often goes wrong. And an example of this is, of course, the great MITRE ATT&CK overview, where people start using the stoplight or the traffic light protocol color indicators. Which in most cases, everybody's looking at this, has their assumptions ready. And it might I might want to convey a completely different message than the one that you're thinking of right now. So please make sure that you're actually showing something to your stakeholder or to anyone that conveys the message that you want. So generally just stop doing this and start either working in granularities of the same color, or figure out a way that you at least engage the person that you're showing this into, or you entice them into a way of asking a question, because the bottom picture tells a very different story than the top one, but it might be the same, right? So in this term, it could be coverage, where the dark colors could actually be really good and the other ones need some more work, and the white ones are just nothing, where the top immediately assumes, if it would talk about coverage, that green, okay, we're done. Let's move on. And every defender, but also every attacker knows that you can execute a technique in multiple different ways. So coverage is never done. And attackers are always developing new kinds of great methodologies, as we'll see later today as well. So then we go into the aspect of modern purple teaming. And there are some base pillars that everybody knows. So risk is usually determined by the business. it's maybe augmented with some threat intelligence, and there are some general assumptions that you can make and some measurements that you can already do. And the controls, of course, are your detections, your mitigations, your policies, all kinds of ways that you have at least some measurability in terms of, or some stopping power. And these are often based on a reference model like the Great MITRE ATT&CK. It could also be the kill chain, it could be COBIT, it could be anything. And of course, a blue teamer starts building all kinds of detective capabilities on top of this. That might have some regulatory reporting tied to that, with one of the factors being the control effectiveness. And then on the red side, these same controls need to be tested. So there are all kinds of reports and indicators that they generate when they do some bigger adversarial simulation engagement. But these are, of course, in a confined scope, and they're very resource intensive. They're manual. They are very creative. So it's not everybody has the means to do this quite regularly. So this takes us to the effectiveness pillar that I want to introduce. And this will support both of the other pillars by providing meaningful, valuable data to management, auditing parties, but also to the teams themselves, and into how they are doing and or how the environment is doing. So on one end, this will at least bring those teams together. This is really a requirement because both have certain expertises that augment each other really, really well in these kinds of engagements. So on one end, you can do purple teaming sessions where you do joint forecasting, hypothesis generation, you execute together, or at least the red team, if they're present, executes it. The blue team hunts, and they work together into building the best kind of detective capability or preventative control. But again, these are also quite resource intensive because you need to be all on the same level at the same time. You have to be working together. This takes a little bit more time, but it is a very valuable one. But for the ones that you want to repeat or that you can actually script, the automated validation could be even better or more effective. And these are fed with jointly created techniques. So sometimes a red teamer comes up with something, sometimes a blue teamer comes up with something, they merge it together. And the great part about this is that it's very repeatable, and this brings the maximum result. So ideally you should do both. If you don't have the capability, then try to balance it out. I'd go for the automated one, definitely, because it's usually a lot cheaper. And it's you can do this in a way more iterations than a big people session. Sorry for so from a high level approach, you don't obviously start by running Dave Kennedy's UniCon or something else in production. You kind of need some sort of methodology to start out. So you start with some governance structure where you establish a white team. You get also maybe some of the IT people involved. You lay some ground rules, some do not go paths, maybe some machines that can't be touched, but also some escalation paths in case something goes wrong, or I don't know, whatever. And of course, you have to have a reference framework. I mentioned a couple before. So there's MITRE ATT&CK, COBIT, PCI. There's maybe HIPAA or the other way of pronouncing it. And from there on out, you start selecting a scope. So there's usually two crucial aspects that you really need there, which is the systems that you want to cover, or environments, or countries, or branches, or whatsoever, and the controls that you want to test or that you really don't want to hit. In case it's an ICS environment, for instance, definitely do not touch some of the PLCs because that might cause the whole factory to stop. These kinds of things. So from there on out, you have some more clarity. You can start your design campaign, or you can start designing the campaign, and you build based on the required objectives or techniques that you want to emulate or simulate. You add them to a playbook, and then you can actually start. So you can start running the campaign, see how it works in terms of execution. So does it actually run? Does it get stopped by some mitigation control? Do I get an alert? Do I get the data? It's also very interesting. If you don't get an alert, at least try to find out why not. And all these results are bundled up into a report. Because you also want to do something with it, and you also need to involve some senior stakeholders most of the time. And this, in essence, is automated adversarial simulation, right? Where it is a valuable way to validate your defenses on a continuous basis. So you can repeat this daily, weekly, monthly. It doesn't really matter, as long as you have that scenario. You can do it as much as you want, or are able to do it, permitting all kinds of rules that you decided upon. And it allows you to measure progress of your effort as well. So maybe in the beginning you missed a couple of detections, which you can then improve and also report upon. But also it might expose some unintended security implications because somebody changed the GPO, or some developer needed some firewall to allow any to that machine, and actually now it's exposing a lot of ports on the internet. Things you want to know about. But it's usually a cost-effective methodology. As I described before, you need less people for the repetitive parts of it. And it will generate a lot of sample data as well once you start running scenarios that you don't have coverage for, but you might have the data for it. And of course, it's not a red team replacement. It's not even a full purple team replacement. You should really see this as an augmentation of it. So it's not Skynet either, because it won't take over your company, hopefully, if you build the scripts at least right. It shouldn't be impacting continuity by design, so you can't break stuff. And it's also not the holy grail or the new buzz, hopefully. Maybe RSA next year will prove me wrong. But at least just see it as a valuable asset, and not as the thing that you only should spend your time on. And the important part here is also that it should be part of your detection engineering efforts, where you start by building an hypothesis, of course, what you want to be detecting later on. So you can also use that same part in scoping your new tests. And in the investigation part, where you usually find out how the tool works, what kind of data it generates, and all these variants that you're executing, you can actually record almost all of them into a repetitive script that you can later on implement in your production in phase 4. When you also implement your new detection rule, you can immediately implement those validation scripts as well to make sure that it actually remains working, it's actually functioning to the way you're expecting it to do. And then, of course, by doing that, you're measuring the efficiency of the rule in a way that you at least know that it's functioning, that it's still working, that the variants that you expect it to cover at least are covered. And you can always augment these scripts with multiple variants, which might drop your efficiency in the short run, but in the long run, your risk posture drops significantly. So how does this look a little bit more in practice? I think I have to speed up a little bit because I'm talking too much. So you have a design phase where you scope a campaign with the risks and controls, the target machines, the timing that you want to use. And these fall apart usually in different separate techniques that also do your pipeline validation, because you want to be testing this end to end. And also your resilience improvement might be one of the factors here. And the frequency is, of course, important. You can do this every 2 weeks, but you can also do this on a monthly basis. But it depends a little bit on the capacity of your team. From there on out, you go to the build and run phase, where you have an orchestrator in general, where you build campaigns, which are basically all the individual techniques. There might be some special scenarios. For instance, there might be a new 0-day out, and you want to be sure that you are covering this. And from there on out, you generate an agent most of the time, which needs to be distributed. So you can do this manually by SneakerNet or the way you want to do it. Of course, you can use a group policy or SCCM in a Windows enterprise environment. You might have a staging machine that randomly picks a target. You can do it through phishing, scheduled tasks. That's up to you. And generally in scope our workstation servers, there might be a rogue implant that you want to do. And of course, you want to also test appliances or software as a service parts, which often are through one of the above means. And then the outcomes need to be reported upon. So all the techniques that you did, how they did it. So if they were executed but they failed or successful, that might be a factor, but also whether your EDR, SIM, SOC, or maybe there was a report from one of the endpoints users. These all need to be combined into a report so that you can measure how you are doing, but also the team might be doing. And then there might be some recommendations from the reporting side, also where to improve. And these can either feed back into the design to improve the campaign that you were running, or you might run some detection resilience improvements where you actually are improving the analytics that you have running. Or you might build a little bit more, or you need to train your team in how to respond properly to these alerts, because they might have clicked it away as a false positive, while it wasn't. So one of the important things here is that it's end-to-end, right? So you need to test your detection logic, your pipeline. So if the log is actually arriving at your SIM or other central solution, your mitigations, but also your processes. So whether the team responds well, whether all the follow-ups are actually doing well anywhere and in production. And especially this is an important attribute where some of the people are only trying in a lab or an acceptance environment. But in my experience, they hardly ever represent a real environment because there isn't any lifelike behavior there, and production environments, despite all policies and procedures, tend to change in ways that sometimes the acceptance environment is neglected because of, I don't know what reason. There's always a reason to change something, right? So definitely make sure to also test first in a lab. But once you're confident that your script doesn't break anything deliberately, you can test it in production or run it in production. And then there's always a risk of something breaking, sadly, but that is because it's a computer and not per se your script. So make sure that in the governance phase, you accommodate to that. And of course, this is all great pictures, but let's make it a little bit more practical, because otherwise I feel like a consultant. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and it's a bit old, but John Lambert once said in a blog post and in multiple talks that defenders think in lists and attackers think in graphs. And as long as this is true, attackers win. And there is a really good lesson to be learned from this one. Is of course, defenders need to think in lists quite a bit, but they often neglect to think about all the visual aspects that they can utilize as well, in order to make a lot of the distinctions a lot easier. So obviously we need to have data, and this is a huge list. But in the following example, I'll be primarily focusing on Windows data, and then specifically Sysmon, since as Jorge already mentioned, this is one of my most favorite tools. So for the people that don't know what it is, it's a free tool created by a very small team of Microsoft employees, which was initially also the internal use. So they tried, they had some incidents in their own environment where they wanted to have some more visibility, and they wrote a wrapper around Procmon, which is in essence, in birth, it was the same driver on the back end to also log these data to the event log. And it's released under the sysinternals license, so your Microsoft support contract doesn't help you, but generally the response is amazing. Usually within a day or something, some of the developers or even Marcus Inovich himself will respond to you and hopefully with a quick fix. So in essence, Sysmon is using a device driver and a configurable service that is running in the background and will write everything that you want to see, or that you tell it that you want to see, to the event log for you, which you can then ship off to your SIM. And there's a multitude of data that you can generate here. So process creation is probably one of the most important ones for various reasons. You might learn that later, but there's a bunch, right? So it's one of the few tools that has this much coverage, And of course, you need to configure it. So one of the ones that you could use is mine, which is linked on the slide. But there's also Swift on security. There's Ironstorm. There's quite a bunch of people that do it in their own way and use what you prefer. But also make sure that you cover everything in your environment, because I tailor this generically, and so it's not tuned to your environment yet. So in terms of graphs and lists next to them, this is the MITRE ATT&CK data sources overview, which all the pillars are basically the references to all the individual techniques. So the bigger the graph is, the more references it has in terms of technique. So process monitoring, being the tallest, has 296 references to the references to 296 techniques. So this is one that you might want to cover, right? So, and this is where Sysmon will at least partially help you in terms of coverage. Then, of course, you need some documentation, which Carlos Perez, a good friend, was able to provide. So everything you want to know about Sysmon, you can find it here. And why would I use it? It's because it's awesome. There is this global unique ID that they utilize, where they tie everything back to the process that's initiated it. So you can build all kinds of fancy trees. Where whenever a process was initiated and then did a DNS request, you can easily correlate those two events, where you don't have to look at the process ID, which you normally have to do in Windows, for instance. Plus, there is a bunch of field names that you otherwise wouldn't get. So with this data, you also need some visualizations, of course, since we only have a lot of logs right now. So I wanted to create a tool for that. And this is based on Splunk. So sorry for the people that use something else. But basically what I wanted to do is create an investigative workflow approach for either threat hunters, but also detection engineers, or even red teamers use it a lot, I've been told. Where you work with mandatory learning and you have to really know your environment where you run it. And it will provide you with some tools to contextualize any trigger that I generate for you based on MITRE ATT&CK. So there will be a coverage gap maybe, of course, and this is built in mostly my free time, so it will not trigger on everything, which might help you also to build your own detections. But most importantly, I wanted to provide various visual aids to support an analyst. Since lists are very useful and requirements, you also need to have some visuals, and that might have to do with my photography background or just the way I'm built. But I like to see it in a visual manner as well, which generally gets me to a quicker conclusion. So the app has a lot of features, which I won't go into detail on all of them, but there's a huge overview, which I'll show in a bit. And then there's various drill down options where you can dig into a computer, a user, a file that was created, and so on. And everything in the app is clickable so that you can easily dig deeper and deeper. And you might have seen all these rainbow colors constantly. And this is the same reason why I created this fancy rainbow for MITRE ATT&CK. It's just because it's easier for me. If I see the color, I immediately know it's discovery or persistence. So I try to sprinkle that as much as I can throughout my app as well, just to have another visual indicator where I can quickly discern whether it's worthy of my attention. So in terms of coverage, I have over 150 reports that I generate. They all feed into these dashboards that I talked about. And these generate triggers for a lot of techniques. Of course, they don't trigger all of the technique variants of the technique, but it's at least a great starting point. And in the interest of time, I will skip the demo for this, because if you're interested in the app, you can look up my blog. But generally, this is the initial overview, which will take you to all various sub dashboards that I just described. And now we get into that. So we have all the means now to at least see what an attacker did. So we want to start utilizing some adversarial simulation tools, and at least preferably an automated one. So there's a bunch of commercial ones. Of course, SCYTHE is awesome. And they have some competitors which have their pros and cons, like everything there is a bunch of open source tools out there. And of course I have to mention Purple Sharp from Mauricio Velasco, which I at least helped him steer a little bit into the direction where it's going. He created everything as a caveat. And there's a bunch of other open source ones, and all of them are nice. A lot of them are quite cumbersome to set up or maintain. And then there's the disadvantage of hoping that the person actually keeps maintaining it once you implement it into your production environment. So make a conscious decision on what you want to use. I use SCYTHE here because it's cool and it works actually really nice in the way that I want to use it. And basically what I did here is I created a demo scenario, which is a two-phase approach, just to generate some of the detections that I have or generate new data for improvement as a primary goal. So it first does some discovery commands. Once it's executed, it makes a screenshot, it looks for a password database, it downloads a second stage binary and PSExec, and then uses PSExec to execute that second stage binary on another host. Where it again runs some discovery commands, some screenshots that it created. And the primary goal is it runs a bunch of squibbly-doo variants, in 10 in this case, just to validate whether my detection is actually working the way I want it to be. So as I'm visual oriented, so I imported all the results from SCYTHE into a Splunk dashboard that I created, where I can see the stages that I ran and which hosts were impacted. And then on the right side, I have a visual timeline of all the techniques that were executed with the commands that actually were tied to that. So I can quickly see what worked and what didn't. In this case, the green ones worked and the purple ones were marked as failed. And this is a case where the command output might be an error in case of redshirt32, for instance, where it gives you an error back, but it actually will execute the technique. So make sure once you are starting to match this in your report that it actually is executed or not. And this is not a flaw from SCYTHE, but it's more of a feedback that they process, which you have to, of course, be aware of. But this is where you go testing. So everything is clickable on this dashboard as well. And this is where the integration with my hunting app again comes back. So once you click on one of those techniques, technique IDs, it will take you to one of my drill down dashboards where it will do a lookup whether I detected something or not. And this is where you see who am I, which machine it was run on, the username, and even the hash of the binary that was used to execute it and so on. So in this case, I detected it. I'm happy, but there might be reasons why something didn't fire. So one of the other dashboards I have is where I really go into the visual aspect, and I generate an overview on the left side of all the rare processes that were executed in my environment. And this is a small one, so I don't do host selection, but this shows me all the anomalous processes that were there graphically on my environment. So we see that Explorer started out with a bunch of sub-processes. There's I love you.exe, which might be interesting, but there wasn't any other action, but the Adobe one actually did some stuff. So you see who am I? We see command.exe, we see PSExec as we built in the scenario. There's some find strings. And then there's also from the command.exe, we see some PowerShell activity. Which also had some consecutive activity where even Sysmon was called, maybe to pull up a config or maybe something else. We can see that on a different level. And then there's the SVC host, which is not very known for executing these commands. So that might be another indicator. And we see the redshirt32 here as well. So if we want some more details, we can click on the executable names that we're interested in, and we immediately see all the relevant details that our rich data source provides us, including the process command line, where we see it connecting to a second machine where it executes SVC host from Windows temp, where it never should be, of course. So all kinds of information here that can lead you into the right direction quickly without going too far from your same interface. And now you can start building a detection, right? But of course, you need to have multiple layers of detecting anything. So the network is, of course, also very interesting. Still Sysmon data. We're doing good. So here you have a graphic overview of all the connections between hosts. And then there's a timeline one as well, where it shows you the activity of all the processes that actually were connecting to a certain IP and how often it did. So you see, at first it's not, it's active, but not extremely. And then there's a huge amount of activity, which might lead you to investigate that host first, because it might be C2 traffic, of course. And you see here the amount of traffic as well, where it's 805 connections. But also these might be interesting when there might be some lateral movement activity or some other connections that are being initiated. So again, scrolling down, there's a lot of detail to be gained. The process GUIDs might be super useful. You could have a look at the IP addresses, for instance, for the one that was so active. So once you click on one of the IP addresses, it will take you to Census as one of my Intel sources or augmentation sources, where it shows you it was a Microsoft IP in Azure. Which might tell you nothing, but if you are a shop that only deals with AWS, this amount of traffic from an internal host might be very alarming to you. So again, it might be, it might help you point into the right direction again. And if we start looking at other ports that were utilized in the higher range, we immediately find the PSXEC command. That also isn't very commonly used anymore. Most of the people use PowerShell remoting now for administrative purposes, at least. So PSXEC in a production environment is always shady. So these are just some of the examples that you could utilize once you miss the detection or you want to improve your detection, maybe even by adding some resilience to it. So we're having to close up a little bit. So in summary, make sure that you really test your defensive pipeline. And this is not only whether they work or not, but also if it's resilient or not, but also whether your mitigations are actually working or your processes are being followed the way they should be. So is the person looking at that alert, making the right determination, and following the right procedures to either escalate or close it. MITRE ATT&CK is awesome, but not all techniques are in there, which is a caveat that you should be aware of. It doesn't fully cover everything in your environment. And most importantly, it shouldn't be a bingo sheet where you try to fill everything. Make really good decisions on what to cover, when, and how thorough. Ideally, you cover a lot, maybe, but it doesn't have to have the same amount of effort into all of them. And automatic adversarial simulation is a really useful tool. You really should start implementing this as soon as you can, in any way or form, because it's adding consistency, repeatability. There's a really good quality aspect because you do it every time, and actually it will free you up from creating more detections, mitigations, or doing some more red teaming, because you don't have to validate your controls with a red team anymore. For instance, I mean, there's so many ways of it benefiting you. And last but not least, try to look at your data more in a visual way instead of only from the table way, which can be useful, but sometimes you miss stuff this way, which would be very visible through a graph or another way of visualizing it. And try to combine as much events as you can, event types. So either combine a process creation event with a DNS request, or with some other proxy data or some DLLs that is loaded, or have a look at everything that is generated to make very strong detections and be resilient that way. So that was my talk. Thank you for being here. Hopefully it was entertaining and mostly interesting. The links of my tools are here. I might have time for 1 or 2 questions, but that's for Jorge to decide. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Olaf. That was awesome. Yeah, the feedback on the Discord has been very, very good. Some folks had heard of Sysmon, but didn't really know what it did, and you definitely covered that. I also mentioned that that's a little hint for those playing the CTF later. So you might need to use Sysmon to answer some questions, and thank you for covering that. Just going through here, I think we have one question that, and feel free to go over the allotted time if it takes a little longer, but just from your perspective, what goes on in your head when you want to select a particular log, like to figure out if one action done by these different tools, right? And thank you for the SCYTHE shout out, of course. Like, what goes through your head as to how to log something? I would imagine something like first see if if the log is enabled locally, then which logs to send across. But like, what goes through your mind? And that question was by Destructed. So let's see what you have.
This is a super good question. It's one of the most valuable ones probably in detection engineering, and it's quite a lengthy process probably, or at least there's multi phases to it, where if I have to cover something new, I probably first research how to use that tool, and actually also all the command line parameters and so on, whatever it is that you have to do. And based on that, I note down a couple that I expect, at least some logs to be generated. So whether it's some network activity so I already have a sort of preliminary focus on which logs I want to give some attention. And then I start executing this on one of my lab machines, which is not the one that is representing the production environment. So it has more verbose logging. It has most of the audit settings on. I have a switch between my Sysmon configs, between a very, very voluminous one, so a noisy one, and my own one, to see whether what generates. So I basically cycle through all the event logs and maybe some local logs to see what is being generated in completeness. And I might catch some irrelevant activity, which is fine. It shouldn't be that much because I'm doing this on a contained system, so there isn't that much side noise. And I note everything down, which might be important. So all the event IDs, all the fields that are in these event IDs, which might have some relevance to this technique. And then I compare that to what I have in production. So I see, okay, what am I missing? And I start building a preliminary detection in the lab, just to see how well it is actually performing, how well it's doing, but also how much noise that all that data is generating, which I require for this. And then once that comparison with production is actually there, I can make the conscious decision of, okay, do I actually need to onboard that additional data part, or can my detection also be acceptable enough without that data? Because well, in this case, it's Splunk, right? So there's a pay per volume model. Some SIEMs have a different model, then it might be less concerning. But still, if you're onboarding 10 terabytes of log that you use for one detection aspect that is circumventable, then yeah, you would still prefer not to get that data, because getting everything might also cause some additional performance problems and so on. So it's probably a very lengthy answer to the question, but there should be some procedure involved, and asserting whether you require everything you expect, but also you might be surprised by some log actually showing you that, I don't know, a DLL was loaded that you didn't expect, or that there were multiple DNS requests to a domain that shouldn't be there. There could be anything, and that makes it a lot of fun.
Awesome answer and awesome talk. There's a number of other questions that came in. So Olaf will be in the briefing channel for a few minutes. I know it's going to be getting late over there, but we appreciate.
Well, it's 5, so it's all right.
It's not too late. After DEF CON, nothing's late, right?
that was late and early at the same time. That was an interesting.
Exactly. Which is
no, this is fine. I'll be here most of the event. I'll pop out for dinner in 30-40 minutes, but I'll be back later for the rest of the program because I'm looking forward to a lot of
so
those great
there's
speakers.
some questions on the Discord for you, Olaf. And again, thank you so much. This was an awesome way to kick off our UniCon event. You explained a lot of things, gave some hints for some of the stuff that that's going to happen later on today, and obviously have tools for people to use that are free, and really dropped a lot of knowledge. So really appreciate that, and thank you again. We'll chat with you on Discord.
Talk to you there. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.